When approval replaced conviction, it didn't happen overnight. There was no announcement, no turning point anyone could name. Conviction didn't disappear. It was slowly traded away, one approval at a time, until leadership began to feel like consensus management instead of direction. This matters now because modern power is measured in alignment. Leaders are praised for unity, consistency, and broad support. But when approval becomes a goal, conviction quietly loses its place. And when conviction fades, decision stops shaping the future. The billionaire at the center of this story was once known for clarity. Their decisions were not always popular, but they were unmistakable. People understood where the empire stood, even when they disagreed. Direction mattered more than applause. The reveal began with good intentions. As the organization grew, complexity increased. More stakeholders, more partners, more public scrutiny. Decisions now traveled through wider circles. Input was gathered carefully. Perspectives were respected. Approval became a signal of strength, proof that leadership was inclusive and modern. The billionaire adapted. Before major decisions, alignment was tested. Reactions were measured. Concerns were addressed early. Ideas were refined to reduce resistance. What emerged felt safer, smoother, more acceptable across the board. And it worked. Fewer objections, cleaner rollouts, less internal friction. But something subtle changed in the process. Decisions began to shift before they were fully formed. Not because new insight emerged, but because anticipated resistance shaped them in advance. Conviction learned to soften itself. Edges were rounded. Positions were adjusted to survive approval rather than express belief. The billionaire noticed it emotionally before it was obvious. Decisions felt heavier, less energizing, more negotiated. Leadership no longer felt like declaring a direction. It felt like assembling permission. The reveal deepened when a proposal the billionaire strongly believed installed. Not rejected, not opposed, just endlessly refined. Feedback cycles multiplied. Language softened. The core idea remained, but diluted, adjusted, reframed until it no longer felt like the original vision. Approval arrived. Conviction did not. The organization celebrated a consensus. The rollout was smooth. No one objected. And yet, the outcome felt strangely hollow. The decision moved forward, but without force. The billionaire realized something unsettling. Approval had become the filter. Conviction had become the risk. And when leadership begins optimizing for acceptance, it quietly stops standing for anything sharply enough to move the world. The conflict was forming beneath the surface, not as disagreement, but as erosion. Because when everyone agrees, it's often because the erosion spread quietly, disguised as collaboration. Meetings grew longer. Language became careful. Proposals arrived pre-softened, designed to offend no one and excite very few. The organization learned how to sense approval in advance and shape ideas to fit it. The reveal continued as conviction became negotiable. Leaders stopped asking what they believed was right. They asked what would pass. Ideas were evaluated not by strength, but by survivability. The question shifted from, the billionaire noticed a pattern in themselves. Before speaking, they anticipated reactions. Before committing, they measured comfort. Before deciding, they waited for alignment. Each pause felt responsible. Each adjustment felt mature. And yet, leadership began to feel strangely absent, even when present. The conflict sharpened when a competitor made a bold, unpopular move. Analysts criticized it. Partners questioned it. The market reacted cautiously. But the move was clear. It had teeth. It signaled belief. Over time, that belief reshaped the space. The empire responded later with a safer version. Approved, polished, aligned, and instantly forgettable. The difference was not intelligence or execution. It was conviction. Internally, energy shifted. Teams executed well, but without urgency. People waited for consensus instead of direction. Initiative slowed, not because ideas were weak, but because no one wanted to push something that hadn't already been accepted. The billionaire felt the weight of it fully during a review where a leader said, that sentence lingered. Approval had become the standard of truth. The conflict was no longer about process. It was about courage. When leaders optimize for agreement, they outsource responsibility to the room. Decisions become collective and therefore diluted. No one fully owns the outcome. No one fully believes in it either. The billionaire realized that approval had not replaced resistance. It had replaced belief. And belief is what gives direction force. Without it, even the best decisions arrive quietly, make minimal impact, and fade without resistance or memory. The next phase would force a reckoning. Either leadership would reclaim conviction and accept disagreement as its price, or the empire would continue moving forward, perfectly aligned and increasingly irrelevant. The conflict reached its breaking point when a crisis demanded a clear stance. Not alignment, not approval, but belief. A sudden shift in public expectation forced the empire to respond quickly. Neutral language would not hold. Balanced statements would not satisfy. The moment required conviction. The organization hesitated. Drafts circulated endlessly. Every sentence was tested for reaction. Every word softened to avoid backlash. Legal reviewed. Communications revised. Stakeholders weighed in. What emerged was careful, acceptable, and hollow. The response said everything and nothing at once. The billionaire felt the cost immediately. The market didn't react with anger. It reacted with indifference. Attention moved elsewhere, toward voices willing to be clear, even at a cost. Competitors spoke with certainty. They chose sides. They risked being wrong loudly rather than invisible quietly. The empire remained safe and unheard. Inside the organization, tension rose. Teams sensed a disconnect. People worked hard, but without emotional investment. When belief is absent at the top, commitment drains from the bottom. Execution continued, but energy leaked away. The emotional peak arrived during a closed leadership session, meant to address the growing unease. The billionaire asked a question that had not been asked in a long time. The room struggled, not because beliefs were absent, but because they had been negotiated for so long that no one could state them cleanly. Positions were described conditionally. Values were framed as preferences. Conviction had been translated into consensus language until it no longer sounded like belief at all. That was the moment of clarity. Approval had not just slowed decisions, it had muted identity. The empire had become fluent in agreement and forgetful of direction. In trying to include every voice, leadership had lost its own. The organization could sense this, and so could the world outside it. The billionaire felt the weight of responsibility settle fully. This was not a failure of communication or process. It was a failure to accept the cost of standing firmly when alignment was incomplete. Conviction always carries risk. Approval only carries delay. The conflict crystallized into a single truth. No amount of consensus can replace belief. No amount of agreement can substitute for direction. And unless leadership reclaimed the courage to be clear, even when it created discomfort, the empire would continue moving forward with perfect alignment, and no one would notice. The next decision would not be about refining language or widening consultation. It would be about choosing whether leadership still meant standing for something, or merely passing what everyone else would accept. The climax arrived when the billionaire chose clarity over comfort. In a moment that surprised even their closest advisors, they stopped seeking approval and started stating belief. Not aggressively, not theatrically, simply and unmistakably. The next decision was delivered without pre-testing reactions. No alignment tour, no softening language. The direction was clear, the reasoning transparent, and the acceptance of disagreement explicit. Some stakeholders pushed back immediately. Others questioned the timing. A few voiced discomfort openly. The billionaire did not retreat. They acknowledged the resistance and moved forward anyway. The effect was immediate. The organization felt it like a change in air pressure. Conversations sharpened. Energy returned. People didn't agree on everything, but they understood what the empire stood for again. Direction replaced negotiation. Belief replaced calibration. The resolution unfolded through contrast. Not every response was positive. Some partnerships strained. Some internal debates intensified. But the empire regained something it had quietly lost: a spine. Execution improved not because everyone agreed, but because everyone knew what they were executing toward. Initiative returned. Leaders stopped waiting for consensus and started taking responsibility. Decisions landed with force, even when they landed imperfectly. The billionaire reflected on the lesson with clarity earned through erosion. Approval feels like leadership because it reduces resistance. Conviction feels dangerous because it creates it. But resistance is not failure. It is feedback. And leadership that avoids feedback avoids impact. The empire moved forward change, not louder, not harsher, but clearer. It no longer needed to be liked to be effective. It needed to be understood. Conviction restored that understanding. Because when leaders stop standing for something, organizations drift into agreement without meaning. And when leaders reclaim belief, even disagreement becomes productive. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. When a